Welcome to SikhCast, brought to you by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.
This episode from the SikhCast is from a live webinar that originally aired on June 19th, 2021.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar hosted by the Sikh Research Institute. Happy almost Father's Day. Happy Father's Day weekend. Today's webinar will begin with a 40-minute moderated discussion between our presenters, after which we will have 40 minutes of Q&A from the audience. So please drop your questions in the chat box and be sure to include your name and city. So we'll start by giving a little introduction to today's presenters. First, we have Bhavdeep Singh. Bhavdeep Singh is a seasoned professional with over 25 years experience and has held senior executive roles in healthcare, retail, and HR. He has worked across multiple geographies and has a strong track record of building great teams while delivering exceptional results. Currently, Bhavdeep is the CEO of Health Quarters in New York, an exciting startup that brings together clinical care and multiple wellness providers on one platform. Govir Singh Gill has over 20 years of experience working at the intersection of innovation, leadership, and business strategy. He is a co-founder and current board chair of the Seva Food Bank in Mississauga. He also serves as a board chair for the William Osler Health System Foundation and is currently serving as Sikh Research Institute's interim executive director. Govir lives with his wife, children, and parents in Brampton, Ontario. Manpreet Singh has been at Barclays Investment Bank since 2008, joining the firm from Lehman Brothers as part of the takeover process. Manpreet holds a first-class BA honors in economics from the University of Cambridge and an MSc in econometrics and mathematical economics from LSE. He is a Sikh alumnus and is involved with multiple volunteer projects in the UK Sikh community. And lastly, we have Dr. Raghudaman Singh Minhas, an Indo-Canadian Sikh and development pediatrician at St. Michael's Hospital and assistant professor in the Division of Developmental Pediatrics, Department of Pediatrics at the University of Toronto. Dr. Minhas's work includes creating Panjabi Kids Health, an online family support resource for the Panjabi diaspora that supports parenting, healthcare, literacy, and parental mental health. I heard they also have a great TikTok presence. So something to look out for. I'll throw it now to Govir Ji to get our conversation started.
Fantastic. Manvinder Kaur, can you hear me? Excellent. So everybody, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome from very sunny, bright, summery Brampton, Ontario, where me and Raghudaman Singh are currently residing. It is Father's Day weekend, we'll call it that, because we're going to try to stretch this holiday out as much as possible, because our fathers are deserving of all that attention and love, and none so much as are my three panelists today, who I've known for many years, dear friends, and we have already had a blast catching up and kind of sharing our experiences and where we're going. We're going to kind of reflect on that today. So today is going to be first and foremost full of corny dad jokes. And we will also try to share some insights, some reflections, our own individual journeys with coming into fatherhood, and always trying to bring a Sikh lens onto things. The role of fathers is many ways is underestimated, underappreciated, but also kind of misunderstood. We all obviously understand the role of mothers and the absolutely central role that mothers play in our upbringing, bringing us into the world and upbringing. And fathers are kind of oscillate between very, very close and very distant. During COVID, much more closer than we've ever physically probably been with our children. But the role of fatherhood has really, really changed. We'll talk today about how our parents and our fathers and our grandfathers, their approach to parenting, and how it's changed for us, and how we're really in the middle of a transition here generational transition, diasporic transition, but also, COVID, like everything, is just upended everything. And so we'll reflect on all of those different things as we go along, and hope to share some tidbits. I'm going to learn from each of these because as my children will tell me often and insistently, boy, I have a lot to learn about parenting. So I'm going to be taking just as many notes as anybody else. Often at SikhRI, we say we're all seekers on the path. We're all learners. And I think with parenting and being a father, that certainly is the case. Nobody's ever prepared fully to be a father. And I don't think anybody fully grows into their role. But before we know it, your children are raised and off on their own. And so during that journey, there's lots of things we'll bring together and gather and share there. So with me, I'm going to just open it up. It'll be very interactive very soon, but I'm going to kind of give a chance for each of you to say a few words. And more importantly, I think, tell me, I'll start. And I was trying to figure out what order to do this in. So I'll literally do it geographically. So I'll start from closest to me to furthest to me. So I'll start with Rupadam Singh, and then Pavdeep Singh, and then Manpreet Singh. Tell me a little bit about your family and your fatherhood journey so far. So tell me a little bit about your upbringing and your family situation, your partner, your children, what life is like right now for being a father during these crazy COVID times, and we'll take it from there. So over to you, Rupadam Singh, first.
Sure. So thanks so much for having me here as a part of this panel. I think in terms of my fatherhood journey, so in terms of context, I have a 9-year-old son, Desi. I'm married. And when I think back on some of the factors that help define what I think of as fatherhood, or even tied to that, factors around what is masculinity as a male caregiver, kind of part of that identity, I think many of us would probably think back to our own families of origin growing up. So to me, I think of my dad. I think of him going to work early. So as part of many fathers, as a part of the diaspora, working hard, often being away. And so thinking about that gift and sacrifice sort of piece to it. And I think that's something that I carry with me. And also try to think about in terms of, when I was in my residency training as a physician, and I was thinking about those long on-call shifts and whatnot, that was a bit of an inspiration, thinking about my dad leaving early in the morning to go drive and doing the work that he was doing as well. And so I think that's part of it. And also, spending time with my grandfathers. And I had the fortune of having both of them in the same household as me for many years, my Nanaji and my Dadaji, and thinking about their personalities and how also the role of grandfathers can be so different from fathers. And when you were talking about earlier about what it's like, about how we're learning as fathers, I feel like some of those characteristics really season and come out as grandfathers, right? And part of it is also your responsibilities are different. But yeah, it's been a big change. And I think we think about these old archetypes or around what is a father. And it used to be this hunter-gatherer, provider, protector sort of role. And I think over the years, we've started to see more men taking on a nurturer role. And I think that's really important as well. So I'll pause there. I could go on for a while, but I think there is an important sort of transition there that we're seeing. And even when we reflect back into significant figures in Sikh history as well, I think there were lots of figures there that had a good balance there when we think about some of the nurturing males as well in terms of Sikh history, but we can get back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great tee up there. So good. But Virji, speak about your family and in your fatherhood journey so far.
Sure. Thank you, Kulveer, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I've reflected quite a bit on the theme, and for all of us, I think we bring our individual stories and our learnings, plus our baggage, to a conversation like this. And for me, the journey as a father actually starts with the journey as a son. And growing up, my father was actually the very typical prototype Indian father, which is that my mother was involved in every element of our lives, every element. My mother was just an exceptional, extraordinary person who just had this massive, massive impact. And then in 2004, my mother passed away in a car accident. At that time, my father was 76 years old, and he had been the classic Indian father, which was that essentially my mother did everything. And he really, I remember going back to when I was in 8th or 9th grade and being someplace and somebody asked my father what grade I was in, and he looked at me and said, what grade are you in again? And you know, he was that father, right? He was that father. It was very January 2004. My mother passed away, and in a fairly short period of time, I saw my father change, and I saw him over a few months become a father and a mother. And all of a sudden, he was doing the small things that my mother used to do, which was that I'd be sitting and working, and quietly he'd come, make a cup of tea, and bring it to me. And the tenderness of the things that my mother used to do all of a sudden started to show up. And that was quite a learning for me because I hadn't seen that side of my father. And by that time, I was a father. I had 2 children. So I reflect on that. I reflect on this Father's Day because my father passed away 5 months ago. You know, after a long bout with COVID, he passed away. And so as a son, you know, when I think about father, I kept thinking over the last few years, I kept thinking to myself, is what I do today is potentially what my children will do tomorrow as they watch me as a son. Because they watch us, right? I mean, our children watch everything we do. And so Ripadaman Singh ji just talked about, you know, your Nana Nani, and I'm sure that as your children ask you and you tell them stories about your parents, they're watching, they're listening, and in many ways, they're taking notes. So I thought that was just from a context perspective, Kulveer. I thought, you know, that there's a great deal of relevance for me there, and just exactly how it manifests itself.
Wow.
My story is that I have 2 children. They're adult children. In many things, they're far ahead of me, far smarter than me, far more intelligent than me. And every once in a while, they remind me of that. And every once in a while, they're gracious enough to acknowledge that maybe there's a thing or two that I can still teach them. I found over a period of time, and I've thought about fatherhood quite a bit, and I'm always intrigued when people talk about, when I hear parents talk about being friends with their children, right? Being friends with their son or their daughter. I don't get that. I don't get that. I don't know that I can ever be my children's friend. I think you're a parent, and your role is a parent. And while my children are grown adults, every once in a while I say to them, because I said so. Because I said so. And you know, it's really interesting. I've learned over a period of time, Kulveer, and I'm a grown adult and I have adult children. You know, there's still days when I say to myself, something happens and I say, Daddy told me that. You know, Mommy told me that. And parents have a way of knowing what's best for their children. But I've thought about this whole idea of friendship, and as I've thought about being a father, it's come to, over a period of time, I've actually come to understand a little bit about what does that look like? What does good fatherhood look like? And it actually comes down to one word for me. It comes down to relevant. Is how long can you stay relevant in your children's life? Right? How long can you be someone that matters? Beyond the politeness and the courtesy and the Hanji ki aale, how are you? Can I get you something? Because that's all formality. How long can you be relevant? You know, with COVID, my children both came back home. My son Satwan Singh and Kiranjot Kaur and my daughter-in-law Hanisha, they all came back home. So in the summer last year, 3-4 days out of the week, my son and I would play basketball. And most of the time he'd win. But every once in a while I got one in there. And that's a part of being relevant. Because if I said to him, "Nahi, bache, you know, thak gaya, gode dard ho rahe ne, you know, I'm not well, you know," then my relevance level goes down. So the fight, the challenge, the push to be relevant, to be able to talk to my children about what's important in their life. Every once in a while, share what's important to me. I think it's an ongoing thing, and I continue to learn. You talked about taking notes before. Look, the reality is I learn things from new fathers. I learn things from all the people around me because it is about the world is changing so fast. Our children are changing so fast. Everything that used to be cool 10 days ago is not so cool today. Everything that's cool today is not going to be cool 10 days from now. How do you stay relevant? How do you continue to be a factor in children's life? And that's what I work on. I work hard at it. Sometimes I succeed. Sometimes I don't.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for lots of interesting points we're going to come back to on there. And this point of being relevant and mattering is important. Manpreet Singh, you don't have as much of a challenge because you have a 15-month-old, so you're very much relevant and involved. So tell me about your journey into fatherhood over the last year and a half.
Yeah, no, look, it's been great to hear the previous 2 testimonies. There's a lot of interesting observations there, and I think, what I would say is obviously I'm a slightly different path of the journey versus those two. So as a result, my perspectives are also somewhat different, just in terms of how I view fatherhood and the position that I'm in. I think, clearly having become a dad through the COVID period, it's certainly been both a blessing and a curse. I mean, in the sense that we've been able to spend, as I'm sure everyone on this call can attest, an unprecedented amount of time with our kid, which potentially you would not have had the opportunity to do in other times. And I think that's been an illuminating process, I think, in two ways. Number one, that bond that it enables you to build with the child, because you're there day in, day out with them, and you're being able to spend that most valuable of commodities, which is time. And I think number two, actually also getting an appreciation for what it takes to raise a child, because I think, in the social construct which we've been in for the last, say, 50 to 100 years, where you have had this mechanic whereby, the dad goes out, the dad works, the mum stays at home. I'm not saying that's necessarily been the case in every culture throughout history, but certainly for us in the specific environments in which we've been exposed in recent history, that has very much been the norm. And I think as a result, you don't really understand, or you don't really see what it takes to bring up a child. And I think it's given me a deep appreciation for what my parents did when I was growing up, and also a deep appreciation for what my wife does and the various things that she's had to go through. And I think being there through that process, through the early months, and seeing the child develop, and they develop so quickly in that first year, I think it's definitely been illuminating. It's been very enjoyable. And I think, it's changed my perception in terms of how I view my own parents, and also how I view, the contributions of all of those who are caregivers in those early years, which is so formative for their children. So I think in that sense, it has been a blessing and a silver lining on what's been a very, very grey cloud for so many people over this period. But that is definitely something that I feel grateful for, that I've had the opportunity to spend that time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I actually want to double click on that, because it's been one I've been thinking about a lot, because I have two boys, Mokum Singh and Saib Singh, and they're 10 and 8. And my life before COVID was just a whirlwind of global travel and coming in and out. And my children on occasion, more than once, call me FaceTime daddy, because I was unfortunately, traveling quite a bit. and I'd always reconciled this around, and COVID really made me think about it differently, is that yes, there's a quantity of time that matters. Of course, that's precious time, but it is also the quality of time that matters, and what you do during that time. And I'm going to ask Ripudaman about this perspective, is that, because I think in many ways, if you look at history, fathers are spending, even pre-COVID, fathers were spending far more time with their children than ever before in history. But that always wasn't adding up. The children still growing up with the same challenges and everything like that. And I also bring the Sikh element into it, that, I'm learning about it's Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib's 400th birth anniversary this year, and I'm reading about his life. And you look about, he gave birth to his son, was one of the most incredible individuals of all time, with Guru Gobind Singh Ji. He spent so little time with his son physically. He was only with him for a very short period of time before his Shahidi. And it just got me thinking, of course, quantity matters, but maybe speak to the quality of interaction of parenting and fatherhood, and how that's changed, and how you're trying to reflect that in your life, and what COVID's done to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about quantity and quality, and I'm thinking from a parenting science and research standpoint as well, in an age where even if we're physically present, we may not be psychologically, cognitively, emotionally present. And so I know one of the biggest things
these things.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And so that's one of the biggest interventions that helps, is being present. So turning off the screens, concentrating a specific time, right? So especially if your child's able to understand scheduling and time periods, and being able to say, you know what, even if I'm working from home, so again, physically present, but not being able to engage during that time, can we say that every day or every Friday at 7 to 8 is going to be our time together, or bedtime and bath time is going to be time with dad. And so that helps to you as well, to be able to say that's the time where quality is going to matter. Something the child can look forward to as well. And there's some reliability as well as a part of that. So I think being able to pre-schedule that in, giving them something that they can look forward to as well is really important. But certainly that quality piece and what you do with it is so important. A lot of it doesn't need to be planned. A lot of it is just that organic being in the same place at the same time. We were talking earlier about our journeys from, this is a bit of a tangent, but our journeys from being sons to dads as well. So some of the best time that I have with my father, who I think might be watching right now, is our car drives or our walks where you're just in parallel and are there. And that's maybe sometimes when some of those conversations grow as well. And so allowing some of that to happen and setting that pattern early in childhood, I think is really important.
Yeah, I always, used to joke about my Canadian friends who would go on fishing trips with their dad. I'm like, what do you do? You sit. What do you do? You sit in a boat. What do you do? Nothing. We just sit there. And what ends up happening is you eventually talk and eventually do something. But so I've learned the value of the bike rides and the car rides as spaces to do that. But Pavdeep Singh, I wanted to ask you, Virji, about this. Is that you've gone through this journey. What kind of around the quality time, and I know your children have grown up to be amazing individuals, amazing Sikhs. They've grown up with that Sikhi in them. How did you really embed that routine into your household, into your lives? Because it's something we struggle with, right? Finding time with the kids for Kirtan, for Paat every day, trying to get that routine going and creating that Sikhi quality as well, in addition to everything else. Maybe speak a little bit about what's worked for you, what hasn't, and how you've kind of tried to maintain a balance in all that.
It's an interesting question, because I think one of the things that, if you reflect upon that for a minute, being a parent, like any good relationship, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? And so very often, quite honestly, like any parent, like any father, my wife and I went through the period of time where everything was Sikhi. You just kind of pounded in them, and in many ways, by the way, that's how I was raised. When we came to this country, there was nobody here. There were no Sikhs. The entire New York area, where there's something like 45 gurdwaras today, there's one gurdwara with about 30 people in it. So my mother had a very, very strong, rigid approach around it, and that's how we started. That's how I started. We have Kirtan playing all the time. My mother used to talk about the environment, and even before my son was born, the room he's going to be in, Kirtan all the time. Build the environment. Build a very peaceful space for the child to grow. And by the time my son was 2.5, 3 years old, Satwan Singh, he was playing tabla with me in public. And, he was able to carry a beat. So I would do Kirtan in public. He would play tabla with me from the time he was 2.5, 3 years old, literally 2.5, 3 years old, because everything was Sikhi, and push. And what was interesting was that, so long as you're providing, so long as you have a very sheltered, contained environment, that actually works quite well. It actually works quite well. But then this thing called school gets in the way, right? And neighbors and outside distractions. And that started to happen. And as my son got older, I started to realize that, because I had a tough time. I came to this country when I was very young, and I went through a lot of crap when I was growing up. And I started realizing that the best way to do this was to start having fun with this, and to start engaging my child in a way that he could become comfortable around who he was before anybody else could. And so by the time he was 5 or 6, I used to make fun of him for the Jura. And we'd be across the hall, and I'd say, hey, you with the thing on your head, Alibaba. And I used to say that, because if he heard his dad say it, it wouldn't sound so bad if somebody else said it, bringing some conditioning around it. And that was, Kulveer, quite honestly, it wasn't one of 40, 50, 60 hours I spent in the week with him. It was one of 6 or 7 hours, maybe one of 8, 10 hours a week. So the impactful time that you can have with your children, and that continues today. Kulveer, like you, I was working internationally. I've been, out of the last 12 years, I've worked internationally for the last 8 years. But I talked to my children 3, 4, 5 times a week. I texted my children every single day, knew exactly what was going on. So I think it's a choice. I think it's a choice in terms of what you want to do. I don't, without making any judgmental statement about anybody or anything, I think it's a choice. It's a question of what priority do you put on it. And, there are days, Kulveer, when I go the entire day and I have passing thoughts of my children because I'm so busy, or I'm running around, or whatever it might be. And then there are days I wake up in the morning and I say, I know now why I'm here on this planet. My purpose of being here is to be a father. But it's a mix. And it's over a period of time. My children are adults, and I'm still working at it. This whole notion of they're 18, they're 21, they're married is all crap. It's every day. It's every day. And I mean every day, as of last night. As of last night. As of the day before. As of the day before. And I think you have to do it over a period of time in a way that's sustainable, consistent, but also credible, that the children accept it as being real value, not just going through the motions, because they see through the motions so quickly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A very, very quick story. My son used to play tabla with me, and this is going way, way back when he was 4 or 5 years old. His name is Satwan Singh. And one day he comes to me and says, "Aao Papa Kirtan kariye." And I was watching a game. And I said, "Bacha, give me a minute, give me a minute." And he came back to me 5 minutes later. He said, "Aajo Papa Kirtan kariye." I said, "Bacha, I'm busy right now." Game finished. I went home. I said, "Chalo Kirtan kariye." Kehna, tusi jaake game dekho. And that's an exact conversation, because at that point he had no time for me. So I think our children watch. I don't think it's about how much time you spend. It's the quality of time, the sincerity with which you do it, and consistency over a period of time.
Yeah, one of the most moments in my life that kind of, your children say these hit you between the eyes kind of moments here. There was a moment like that where the boys needed us, and both me and my wife were doing something, of course, very important on our phones or something, right? And of course, doing there. And at one point, my son walks away. He was only 4 or 5. He goes, "Mommy and Daddy love their iPhones more than they love their children." and he said it with a smirk. He's a snarky guy like me, but it kind of, 5 years later, 6 years later, I said, well, that's a moment. That's something that obviously I don't want to be the case. It's not the truth, but to your point of being present, being there for them. So I reflect on that a lot. Manpreet Singh, I'm always, this is great. I love coming kind of back to the beginning now, because you're, we have somebody on the other end of the journey, but you're coming across, and we met through SikhRI and through the Siddiq experience, which was kind of very kind of immersive experience. And I know you've been going on your Sikhi journey. I'd love to kind of get your thinking now. Is that, you're with your daughter, how are you starting to think about building this kind of sense of sangat in the home, this sense of grounding in Sikhi, this nurturing kind of figure there? How's the Sikhi kind of informing the way you're parenting right now? Are you thinking about it actively, or are you still in the crazy phase of just trying to get through the days with your daughter?
No, it's a good question. I mean, I think the earlier you start to think about some of these things, the better it is, because ultimately, I think both my wife and I, one of the key things that we do want to try and achieve with our children is to pass on that value and that love for Sikhi, because ultimately we believe that's going to be the best thing, which is going to enable that child to navigate the world ocean, as Guruji puts it, and live a productive life to the maximum of their potential. And so, we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we build that love for Sikhi within the child. And I think there are a range of ways in which you can do that. I think the advantage of living in today's world is that there are ample resources that you can pull on to achieve that. So, for example, some of the children's books that they have to sort of encourage that interest or love for Sikhi from a young age it's fantastic. I mean, it's much better than what I remember when I myself was growing up. There are things which are very specifically geared towards children. There's one we were reading the other day, the Guru's Adventure or something along these lines. And, my daughter, Jyadako, she loves that book. She's already very naturally going towards it. She's starting to get a base level of familiarity with concepts such as who the Gurus were, this idea that they're connected to the divine, they're in everything, everyone, Waheguruji is everywhere. And, you start to see a little bit of that, even from a very young age, you can see them start to build that degree of familiarity with it. So I think there's things you can do from an early age in terms of building that familiarity through toys, books, whatever it might be. I think Pardeep Singh made a good point earlier, which is, ideally you want to have an environment where they start to get at least passively exposed to some of these concepts. So doing Bard with the child, even if they don't understand, well, clearly they don't understand everything that's going on, but they see, okay, at this particular point of the day, mummy and daddy do this, and they're doing that every day. So it starts to become almost part of their routine. It's part of the process, in the same way that you'll have your bedtime routine, you'll have other routines. And I think that's the key in terms of institutionalizing some form of structure around it, which enables them to embed it within their own day. And I think you have to be thoughtful about that, create that, and then sustain it. I mean, the other observation I would just make, actually, and I think it's important to sort of take note of this when we consider this, is that, for all that we might try and do, we also have to remember that ultimately, we need to live in hukam. And, a lot of this is ultimately within Guru's gift. And if you look through Sikh history itself, I mean, it's quite interesting, because, obviously there are multiple inspirational stories, but we should also remember that, for example, Guru Har Rai excommunicated his elder son, Ram Rai, You have Prithi Chand, very troublesome character within the Sikh front. He was the son of Guru Ram Das.
Yeah.
Even Guru Nanak Dev Ji's own sons ultimately went off down a different path, which is why he, passed on the Guruship to Bhai Lehna Ji and Guru Angad Dev Ji. And so I think we always need to remain cognizant that whilst we are ultimately going to make the efforts that we are going to make to try and foster that love, ultimately without Guru's Kirpa and without Maharaj's grace, those efforts are limited in terms of what impact they may have. You do need to have that additional aspect in order for this to happen. I mean, of course, we should all endeavor to do our utmost and do the right thing. But, I have seen in many instances, parents who are deeply committed, they did all the right things, quote unquote, and, the kids just elected to go down a different path. And, ultimately, I think that is just a function of life. That is hukum. And so what I would say is, whilst, we can talk about, what are the different things that we can do,
Yep.
we should never forget that, as Guruji puts it itself, the jewel isn't necessarily residing just with us.
Yep. Oh, that's amazing. I think this leads to my question for Ripudaman is around, at the end of the day, it's like, I know Ripudaman is a gardener as well, right? The gardening analogy is that you can't actually make the flower grow. Right? The flower is going to do what the flower, the tree is going to do what it's do. But what you have control over is the environment. Where you plant it, the amount of light it gets, the watering, the shade, the weeding, all those different control, all those other variables in your control. And at the end of it, if those go well, the plant prospers and nourishes. Otherwise, that's there. So maybe, what's the science there, Dr. Ripudaman was saying around, creating a nurturing environment, helping children kind of realize their destiny and kind of, hopefully it's one that is falling within the realm of possibilities that we as parents would love to consider, but ultimately don't have the control over there. So how do we kind of this nature, nurture, control environment, where's the science say that we should be really, we should be putting our efforts, our intentions as parents?
Yeah, and that reminds me of this quote, which is something along the lines of children are not things to be molded, but rather people to be unfolded. And so kind of watching them unfold, and your job is to support them with that in terms of what's already predestined within them. And when we think about, from a parenting science standpoint, what are those experiences that help in terms of long-term benefit, whatever that means. But there are these studies that were called the positive childhood experience studies. And they were a corollary to something that's quite famous that's called the adverse childhood experience studies. And so we know that there are certain early experiences, including abuse, physical, emotional, sexual, neglect, household dysfunction, which we know lead to, down the road, behavioral challenges, mental health challenges, economic challenges, and even physical challenges, like a higher likelihood of even cancer if you've had those experiences. And then on the flip side, when we think about positive experiences and what we can do, there's some key features that come up, and I have them written down. But so it's asking children, or the idea is in these studies, they asked grown-ups to look back and say, was I able to talk to my family about my feelings? Does my family stand by me during difficult times? Did I feel supported by my friends? Did I enjoy participating in community traditions and activities? Did I have a sense of belonging, especially during my adolescent years as well? And then did I have two non-parent adults who took a genuine interest in me? So that's really interesting when we think about concepts of sangat, right, which we were talking about earlier, and who are those influences outside of mom and dad as well. But that plays such an important part in that energy and the factors that are outside of you from a physical health standpoint as well, long term.
If I go through that list of things that are there, the non-parental support, the supportive environment, a place to be, question, explore, do those things, non-judgmental, all those different things. But Deep Singh, I can't help but think you've engineered the perfect space with Camp Chartikala. And you've been running that for many years as your family, as your pride point. Your children have grown up in it. I would love for you to speak about the role, for all of us, rightly or wrongly. I can't wait for the COVID camps to come back, because the post-COVID to finish, and all the different camps to start up, because they were such a crucial part of my upbringing, my connection. The very first Khalsa school camp I went to in Calgary, when they came by, 1 week into the camp, transformed my life. received Amrit and never looked back. And I look at that as such critical junctures, and I'm trying to create those spaces for my children. What is the magic of camps and that sense of sangat that we've been able to create in the diaspora here, and how's that transformed the children and their Sikhi experience and their overall upbringing?
Well, it's funny. I think you actually hit the point right on the nail on the head when you talked about sangat. Right? I mean, we talk about sangat now. A 15-year-old doesn't call it sangat; he calls it the people I hang out with. And camp did exactly that for me. I went to the very, very first camp that was held in this country 40 some years ago. One of 52 children in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it was funny. When we came back from the camp, we apart from we met a lot of young people like us who were going through the same types of things that we were going through. So the idea of sharing ideas, sharing an experience. And we had our first exposure to American Sikhs, and understanding Sikhi from a different perspective. I'd heard the Chali Mukte story 100 times and never got it, right? Till I had a white guy, a man named Gurbanda Singh, explain to me about how 46 left and lost faith in the Guru, and how they came back, right? And how in my language, in words that I could relate to, because to this day. While there's so much going on, there's so many wonderful things going on with camp. And there are many, many wonderful initiatives that many Gurdwaras have undertaken. But the reality is, and thanks to Sikhi to the max, there's lots of stuff we can understand now that we didn't. But much of what happens in the Gurdwara is still beyond the children, still beyond their, goes over their head. So it doesn't connect. So I think that creating the right environment, I've always said that, and this is philosophically, I've had this view for a very, very long time, that if you go to camp and learn something, that's a bonus. That's a bonus. You're actually not supposed to learn anything at camp. Camp should give you the impetus to go learn. Because what camp does is create a sangat, right? The idea that the children come to camp and in 1 week get transformed, anything that's feels too good to be true is probably too good to be true. It takes time. It takes time. It takes a connect that get built over there. And I would tell you, Kulbir, like you, some of my best friends in life are people that I met at camp. Some of the best lessons I've learned around Sikhi are things that happen at camp. The sangat, the support. I've talked to many, many people who've come out of camp. And, if you look at the Northeast in the US, where, the camps that our family's been involved in, and many, many other families as well, the Ravi Bhallas of the world. And, if you just think about, the upbringing and the fact that he came out of the camp environment. If you look at Gurbir, who's the Attorney General in New Jersey, same, a lot of the camp environment. So the camps have done a wonderful job, whether it's here in New York, whether it's in Washington, whether it's Kuldeep Uncle in Michigan, Ohio, and now in Florida. IGS has done some wonderful work on the West Coast. I mean, it doesn't really matter who's running it. It's just that building and creating an environment. And what happens is that I think for a lot of our children, they go there and they come back and they, apart from the friend network they build, they come back and say, I met somebody who knows what they're doing. I met somebody who actually understands the message that's been delivered. And that happened, and I shared this a little bit earlier, that happened with my son. He went to a camp in Canada a few years back. And he came back from the camp and he was talking about the camp and what happened at camp and how it went. And he said, I met this really great, one of the teachers there was a really cool guy. And he started talking about how cool this person was, et cetera, et cetera. And he had said this, and he said, Dad, you got to meet this guy. He's really great. And I said, what's this really cool guy's name? And it was our dear friend Kulbir Singh here. And that's what my son was talking about. And that kind of impact is important. One very quick, my daughter is Kiranjot Kaur. Young ladies growing up as Sikhs are looking for role models. They're looking for role models who can actually, because, the Sikh guy story is a well-known story, right? Thing on your head, pagadi, dadi, juda, the whole bit, all the stuff we go through. But the Sikh core, the young core struggle is a quiet one. And my daughter, Kiranjot, has gone to multiple camps, and she's attended multiple, not just the camp here, but other camps around the country. And she's looking for role models. She's looking for somebody that I can look to and say, this is somebody who's living Sikhi the way a Sikh core should live, right? And without going into the details, my daughter has found different role models. Every once in a while, I'll go into a room and she's singing a Shabad. I said, but where'd you learn that Shabad? And she'll play some tape of some Bibi who's doing Kirtan. And she said, this is such and such. Because she's looking for those types of role models. And I think that's where, apart from the Sangat, our children, whether they say it or not, whether they are shared or not, they're all looking for role models. Can I be that person? Can I do what they've done? Can I be successful and effective? Can I be another Manpreet Singh, who's a young guy, right? Who's doing so well professionally? He's got a pagadi dadi. Can I be some Bibi who's a successful core, who's living by? I think all those things matter in a big, big way as well. Yeah. And that's what I think the institution of camps and Sangat have given our children.
And I love the idea that, in a week, the success of a camp is planting the seed of curiosity, that they desire to go on the journey on their own, that they're not sitting there waiting for everything to be done to them. But they now, next time they have a choice of what they're going to listen to, what they're going to watch, what they're going to read, they choose a path step closer to the Guru, and that they start taking it. And it's not their parents' journey or somebody else. It's their own journey there. So I want to touch on the core aspect as well, because and this is one where Ripudaman and I have less experience raising sons, but Manpreet Singh, I'm sure you and your wife have considered that, you have a young core now, and how are you considering that the upbringing of her, the special attention, the thought, maybe a bit of the fear that you also have around, raising a young woman in this environment, in this core, and then tapping into the Sikhi as a source of strength there. How are you navigating all that, or starting to think about that? And also maybe drawing upon your camp and Siddhic experience, those kind of things that go into it. So maybe reflect on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think what I will say is I think there is obviously ample inspiration which you can draw on from within the Sikh tradition, because from a religious perspective, it's evident and it's very clear within Sikhi around how the equality between men and women should operate, and how that ought to be infused into daily living, and even the way in which that's been formalized through Rehat Maryada and the way in which Sikhs ought to live. But clearly there are cultural components to the circumstances that a lot of women have historically faced within the Panjabi community and South Asian community more generally, and actually even outside of that. Sometimes people forget that, even in countries which are, allegedly super modern today, the whole concept of female rights is relatively recent. I mean, in the UK, it was only in the 1990s that it became illegal for a man to rape his wife. And, we shouldn't forget that there's been a lot of movement within a very short period of time, and there are still a lot of problems that need to be navigated and need to be overcome. And look, I think that does create a consideration in your mind, but equally, I don't think that Sikhi is a path which encourages one to be fearful or one to have apprehension. I think, we definitely want to bring up our daughter, with the very clear mentality and ethos that there is no differentiation from a gender perspective, and that ultimately we hope that becomes instilled within her and part of who she is. And I think that is something that we definitely look to aim for in our achievements. I think, in terms of how it relates to some of the things that we've seen within the camps that I've attended. I mean, I do think that, we live in a fortunate era in the sense that, I think about, my experience at Siddiq. There are very many hugely inspirational, very impressive women that I met at Siddiq, and it was relatively balanced from a gender perspective. I think these spaces do exist increasingly for Sikh women in perhaps a way that they didn't 20, 30 years ago. Although that might be unfair on the circumstances at the time. I can't really comment because I wasn't around. But I do feel like there is a growing awareness around the fact that historically there has been a little bit of a disconnect potentially between what we are supposed to do from a religious perspective and what's actually happened in practice. And I think that people are now at least all bought into the idea that, that's very clearly wrong, and we need to address and we need to alleviate that issue. Yeah. And, that's very much, the spirit in which we hope to bring up our own daughter.
Yeah. I want to, that was beautifully said. Ripudaman, I guess I want you to reflect on the other side of that. You're raising an amazing son with Deg Singh. And I haven't heard you say it, but I would go and say that you and your wife both of you are very, I would say very strong and assertive feminists, and really working for gender equality and all right. The role of fighting for equality is as much a fight for, and as much more amongst the men and the Singhs in our community, as well as we have a role to play. So I want to maybe have you touch on that our sons are going to be born with the privilege of being men. And yes, while the culturally and ethnically, there may be some other stigmas there, but but they're also going to grow in affluent homes, hopefully good education is everything, then that how are we raising our sons, our children there, but especially our sons to be allies? I really struggle with this, that, I've actually noticed that I'm like, often my son has been, had kind of incidences with bullying, and we've resolved it. But often I've had the sense of, well, what if my son is the bully? Or what if my son is watching the bully and being a bystander to this or a perpetrator of this? So how are you thinking about making sure that our sons, especially, but our children, are very much allies, are active voices in this, as Sikhs should be? We're never meant to be passive and bystanders on that. What's the environment say about that and the science say about this?
So it's important to have those conversations early and openly, I think in a developmentally appropriate but honest way. And we talk a lot about different types of equity at home, and certainly gender equity has been a theme we've been talking about over the years. And part of that, I think, is important for that child, that individual, as they grow up, to recognize in these various dimensions that the world has created around whether you're centered or marginalized, privileged or disadvantaged, where do you sit? And so recognizing your privilege and position and power within society, and how that can be leveraged to make space for others who may not have that, how that experience is different. And it's important to talk about history and to talk about our history as Sikhs, our history with what things were like for our mothers and grandmothers, and what we'd like to see change as well. So I think it's really important to have those conversations. Luckily, there's more resources out there in the form of, social stories and board books starting early on, that we can have some of these conversations. But I think having that as a space for at home to be able to talk about that, to explore it, including in early years and play in books, like I was saying. And then I think the other piece that Bhavdeep Singh Baji was talking about is around modeling, right? So kids learn by watching us more than they learn from listening to us. And so I think looking inward around what are our behaviors, how do we interact with society as well, and what is the tone that we're setting for our sons and daughters as well.
Yeah, no, I'm finding the conversations are happening, and because we're at home now and we can spend more time on it. But my sons have developed this strange habit of pre-dinner watching the news. They'll go on YouTube and they'll watch news clips, and the news clips are of, we're in Canada, they're in, Black Lives Matter, Indigenous reconciliation, Islamophobia, farmers protests, all these different things are happening in there. And what I'm finding is it's creating great space for discussions. And I think for me, it's always been, well, we're always going to share the facts so you get a full story. And then it's, what do you think? How should we respond as Canadians, as Sikhs? What should our response be? And I'm finding that it's becoming a challenging space, actually, because our kids are feeling the injustice in the world and also the frustration of what to do about it.
And I think that's really important, because kids are inundated with information. And I think it's important, as families and parents, to help filter and process some of that.
Yep.
But when we think about everything that's going on in the world, and especially depending on, again, your child's level, thinking about what can they do? So is there something, are they feeling kind of upset with it? It can be overwhelming if you feel powerless because this is happening around you. So is there something in your own backyard that could happen? And so I know at home with Big Sing, we were talking about that with everything that was happening with the farmers' protests as well, and feeling powerless about people who look like you that are going through these injustices and are part of our families at times as well. And what can we do? And so part of that was, is it raising awareness? Is it doing a presentation for your class? Is it doing some fundraising locally? Because then that helps you feel like there is something that you can do. There is hope. And I think that part of our roles as fathers is to help instill hope and to help children understand really what is the role that you can play in society as well. So I think thinking about that as that information comes in, if there is that impetus to try to act on it, really, can we help give them some of those tools?
Yeah, helping find outlets, contextualizing and helping find outlets for expression and working their way through it. Absolutely. This kind of lends to another topic that I think as fathers, as sons, we've all felt this from our parents at different points around. So what are you going to do with your life exactly, right? And we've all kind of, I'm sure, well, one of us succumbed to the pressure of becoming a doctor. So that was Ripadam, and hopefully that was by choice and not just by force. But a question for Bhavdeep Singh is around career. I wanted to spend a couple of minutes on that because this starts, it's unbelievable how quickly the pressure for this starts now, right? Around education, getting into a good school, top school, marks. Is your 4-year-old coding or not, or what's happening, and have they learned all the skills and things there? And this, and I know in the UK there's this, it starts very early, right, of streaming you into a particular career path that you want to go on, and while I think none of us are as pressurizing as our fathers probably were with this around I'm still, there's a navigation there that we need to encourage, that we still want our children to achieve, but helping them find it. So, but Vipsing, I know your son, I know it well, and he's had some really interesting career choices already in what he's doing in his life and stuff. How did you navigate that conversation with your children, from a Sikhi lens of them doing something that matters, that's relevant, that's satisfying to them, and at the same time still being able to take care of themselves and do something noteworthy? What's the conversation you had around careers growing up with your children?
The career conversation in the Singh household started fairly early, just because it's something that's always been a priority for me. And once upon a time, when LinkedIn first started, for my children, quite honestly, both my children were on LinkedIn from the time they were in 10th, 11th grade. We always thought about careers. We always thought about what are you going to do, and networking, and start understanding how the world works. And, just because as a professional, I've spent a good bit of time in HR. I've had a lot of conversations about, how do you position yourself? What do you want to study? And what's that going to do for you as you go forward? So fast forward, my son works for the NBA, the National Basketball Association. My daughter works for a PhD. She's in the paid social. My daughter-in-law works for Samsung. And we're the classic Zoom family. When the kids came back, apart from making sure that we got more groceries coming in, we had to up the Wi-Fi strength of the house, because at any given time you had 4 or 5 Zoom meetings going on. And, Manpreet, that's the kind of stuff you have to look forward to. As your children get older, and maybe Rupadam Singh ji, it might be starting with you, and Kulveer, I'm sure, for you as well. But we, quite honestly, career is not, let's sit down and talk about career. Careers, it's a way of life. I mean, that's what we talk about. And, I struggle with Kulveer. I struggle with the idea of find something that's meaningful, find something that aligns. I think that you have to find meaning in whatever you're doing, whether you're a doctor. When the whole Black Lives Matter, what happened last year, my daughter got very, very involved. We used to have some really passionate conversations at the dinner table about what was happening in the country. As a Sikh, you can't help. As a father, I couldn't help interject and say the Sikhi view in this, which is that, yes, of course, Black Lives Matter. Of course, we need to educate ourselves, and we would have lots and lots of discussions and conversations. But, again, the Sikh in me and the father in me couldn't help but say, also learn and educate what we went through as a community.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The challenges we've had.
Yep.
And at the same time, because the gurus, what's become so relevant and so widely understood by the world is the concept of seva and doing for others, which is what the Sikh Panth has been getting even more and more recognition for. So certainly do that, but get involved. And so my daughter got very, very involved in Black Lives Matter, got very engaged, very involved, was a passionate, outspoken person in her organization. My son working in his role at the NBA, even very recently with all the COVID challenges that he's had, he's been sending letters out to his colleagues at the NBA about, hey, look what's going on in India. Yeah. Look what's happening with the farmers and whatever the issues might be. So I think that whether you work for the NBA, PhD, or my daughter who's at Samsung, who's been doing similar things, or if you're at the Sikh Coalition, right? Or if you work with the Peace Corps, or if you're a doctor, I think the question is, how do you bring your values into what you do?
Yep. How
do you bring your values into how you interact with people? Because quite honestly, the challenges in the corporate world, the challenges in the professional world, this whole line around drawing a line, this work-life balance stuff, it's just not there. It's really about all coming together. And how do you bring meaning? How do you bring values? And how do you continue to educate people? Kulveer, I can tell you that 15, 20 years ago when we started talking about Baisakhi, A, I started taking Baisakhi off, but B, I started telling people why I wasn't around on April 14th. Sure. Taking the day off as forgive me, this is the New Yorker in me, just taking the day off as a cop-out.
Yeah.
Right? I got a holiday. That doesn't work, right? Why am I taking the day off? Right? Send out a broadcast email that this is why I'm taking the day off. It's Baisakhi, and I want you to And just as I wish you Merry Christmas when you see me, please wish me Happy Vaisakhi.
Yeah.
Right? That is where I think it starts to come together. That is how you bring meaning. So it doesn't matter to me whether you're a coal miner, a doctor, or a professional athlete.
Yeah.
Bring meaning, bring your Sikhi with you, bring all your values with you, and bring back what you learned from others as well. So I think if you can do that in an effective way, look, we're so fortunate that we have so many young people that are they're going to do just exceptional, amazing things. I am convinced to this day, and I've said this to anybody who listens, and now that I have an audience, I'm going to say it here as well. It's very, very possible that within my lifetime, and I have less time than Manpreet does, right? In my lifetime, that a Sikh will hold a meaningful, a significant position in this country. Canada, you guys are pretty close already. It's very likely that it could happen here as well. So I just think that there's so much happening so fast. Good Lord. Bring it on. Bring your Sikhi with you. Bring your values with you. Come in. Go big or go home, but do it with everything intact.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I can only imagine you giving that speech at the front of a camp with a couple hundred Sikh children there and riling them up to go take on the world. That's fantastic. I'm just encouraging all of our viewers today, and I want to call them not just viewers but participants. I've seen some good conversation happening in the chat, but also any questions that you have for any of the panelists or any musings, please jump in there, because I think it's. We could talk to ourselves all day, but we're doing this for everyone who's on the webinar as well. So I've been kind of going in rotation, if you hadn't noticed, around each of you, but I want to kind of draw on a few more questions around all of you. Just we've kind of talked about the upside, the potential there, but of being a parent, being a father, but it's still really hard. And it's still full of, and I can share myself, not just the physical exhaustion that Manpreet's saying, I'm sure you still feel, but this sense of just, parenting is, somebody said to me, it's like ripping out your heart and putting it out there. And there's only so much control of what you can do out there. And you're always, I'm not a worrier about most things in life, but I worry about my children. I worry about this. And when I'm done worrying about one thing, I worry about the next thing. And I look at my parents and I'm like, that's not going to change. but as we go forward, for any of you, what's the kind of stuff that is really hard for you right now? Or maybe sharing, like, what's the part that you're kind of saying, I'm really trying to balance this or trying to figure this out? What's the part that is still, still work in progress for you right now? And this goes to anybody now. The next ones are for anyone.
So maybe I'll hop in. I was thinking about some of the comments earlier about how it's a living process. So part of the task of parenting is to prepare your children for independence. And so there are these ages and stages they go through, and you have to up your parenting game every time they go on to that next stage, right? Because they are ready to move on to. So for Manpreet Singh, it might be that your child, you're going to have to start baby proofing if you haven't already, as your child starts to walk. But then on to we're in this stage now where we're thinking about video games and online safety, and then what is adolescence going to be like? What is it going to be like when our son gets a driver's license? And so that I think is tricky, and I do this professionally as well. But as a dad, having to always be upping my game, always talking to other parents, trying to keep up in terms of what those strategies can be, and we go through these bumps where our son kind of outreaches us a bit, and then we have to stop, and my wife and I have to regroup and read and talk and kind of pull on some of these resources on really, now we're at this next stage, what can we do? And then I think that's hard. And I think culturally that's difficult also to think of your child moving towards independence, where a lot of the joys culturally of parenting have been stoked around the caregiving that parents do. And so I think flipping that narrative really is trying to take joy more in those first steps away from you, right? And looking at how they can spread their wings and stand alone as well. So I think that's a tricky sort of balance to think about.
Yeah, no, this idea of roots and wings has been very important to me. But our job as a parent is to give our children the roots of their Sikhi, their value, their education, but also give them the wings to fly and to soar. And as Bhavir Singh saying, "Lami aur dariyan maan vaste," right? And I often think that we sometimes think of the typical Panjabi parent is deep roots, keep going deeper and deeper. But wings, don't need to go that far. So how do we encourage this? How do we bring our children to independence, whether it's being able to take care of your bodily functions and yourself, to being able to earn an income and being able to make a dent in the world? What's maybe I'll pick up Deep saying maybe a little bit is like, how have you really encouraged that sense of independence in your children that they were really going to find their own space in their own world out there for them?
You make it sound like they needed my permission. They don't, and they won't. I'm just happy if they ask me my opinion, right? And you might be saying, well, yeah, that's all good and well, Mr. Singh, and your children are older, so you're saying that, but no, it was like that when they were 14 too, right? Because we've talked about this a couple of times, and Manpreet talked about the gurus before. Look, as a parent, you talked about cultivating, right? Creating an environment. And yet, on the one hand, you have Guru Tegh Bahadur and his son Guru Gobind Singh, and you mentioned earlier that how much time could he possibly have spent with him? And then you talk about Prithi Chand, right? And Baba Ram Rai. And so if an environment can be created by any one of us, whether it's you or me or Manpreet or Ripadaman, but even if the gurus created an environment, and it didn't yield what was expected. if it could happen to the gurus, but then who are you? Who am I?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and history, the Sikh history teaches us so much that, because somebody once asked me this question. I was telling one of my children, my daughter, this yesterday. But somebody asked this question that when Guru Arjan Dev Ji, Tatti Tabete, did he feel any pain? Did he feel any pain? And the answer is, of course he did. Otherwise, what could he teach us about accepting pain or dealing with pain? If he didn't feel pain, if he was beyond mortal and he didn't feel pain, then the whole thing is a scam. Of course he felt the pain. So as a father, while there's less written about it, you have to ask yourself, what must have gone through Guru Ram Das Ji's mind? Right? The struggles of a father, the struggles of a parent. So I think you create the best possible environment you can. You give as much quality, and you try to stay relevant. I keep saying this word relevant because, if you're not relevant, you're furniture. Right? You're nice to look at. That's about it. Right? And you make sure you don't get it dirty. You kind of tiptoe around it. You clean it every once in a while. But that's all you are. You're not going to the movies with it. You're just furniture. Well, I think the best you can do is create the best possible environment. Do it with some level of credibility and integrity, right? Try not to be a hypocrite, because we're all hypocrites, right? All of us, right? Starting with me, we're all hypocrites, right? That's just human nature, right? My mother used to say, don't expect too much, we're just human. Itna zyada nahi expect karo. Insaan hi hai. Create the best possible environment. Be honest, put your best foot forward, and hope for the best.
Well said. Well said. Question for each of us is, and this kind of came up in there about managing all the different roles we have to play. It was, in a way, it was always, when I was younger, it was convenient. I used to call it kind of the three-legged stool of like, I have to manage kind of myself, my career, my community, and my family. And family was all kind of one, because it was there. And then, you get married and there's one other person and your parents were there. But more and more now, we all play so many roles in our lives. And especially during COVID, I live in a multi-generational house. So I'm the son, the husband, and the parent all at once. And right now I'm the son-in-law, right, as well. My sister lives nearby, so I'm the brother, but I'm also the mama. We play all those roles in our family, and then all the community and everything we do. So the word self-care comes up often, right? And what that means. And I don't know. I'm not a big golfer. I don't have those escapes. I don't have the luxury of that, but I try to take care of myself. And I'm just, as all of you have been going through this, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about the struggle, but more importantly, like, how have you been keeping yourself sane? What's been, how has Sikhi grounded you? What's been the routine there so that we can show up? So when the time is there, we actually are engaged and can put the quality into it to make it happen there. So I haven't heard from Manpreet in a bit, but maybe start first from you and let the others to chime in as well.
Yeah, no, look, it's a good question, and I think ultimately the point is a valid one, which is how can you expect to look after other people if you're not looking after yourself to some degree? Mm-hmm. And so I think in terms of how you manage your time, because ultimately it is around time management, is you do need to make sure that you're also continuing to invest some time in yourself, because that's also what's going to enable you to become, a better husband, a better father, a better son, at the same time. And so I think, what I've tried to do from a personal perspective is, I think it's important to maintain your health, because healthy mind, healthy body. So for me, I think some form of exercise regime is incredibly important, and maintaining that degree of physical, rigor, even during that period in the early months where, you're getting very limited sleep and it's all hands on deck. But I think maintaining some degree of exercise and keeping your health in a good state is very helpful. And then, I think it's important to have some sort of interests or passions that you maintain, because it was interesting hearing, Ripudaman and Bhavdeep talk about it earlier, but this whole idea around your preparation for what to do when the kids ultimately leave. I mean, you do see empty nest syndrome as the thing with a lot of people, right? Which is you sort of construct your entire life around the children. And I've seen this happen to some degree, within my own family. You do need to make sure that you've got something within your life outside of your children, in addition to them. Obviously, they're the priority. Obviously, they're a focus. But ultimately, you are looking to bring up your kids at some point so that they do have that ability to go out and live their own life. And I think that's where I've seen a lot of elder people within our community at times struggle is navigating that change can be challenging for them for a number of years. And so I think maintaining some degree of interest in hobbies that are important to you, to Bhavdeep Singh's, point, having some degree of fulfillment in the work that you're doing day to day and bringing yourself. I love this idea of, bringing your Sikhi into that workplace and maintaining that. And then also making sure that you look after your health. I think these are all prerequisites. And then, of course, look, the Sikhi component, I think, helps enormously, because it enables you to take a step back, see that bigger perspective, ground yourself, understand also that for all the problems that you may think that you're having, life is ultimately transient and a magical thing. And, it's important for us, I think, to have that sense of gratitude. Even being a father itself is a privilege, and being in that position where we're able to enjoy that, I think, is something that we need to be thankful for. And I think when you feel thankful for the things that you have, that then does change your perspective on some of these struggles or some of these stresses that you may be facing day to day.
Yeah, oh, well said. Ripudaman, what are your thoughts?
So around self-care, I think so much of that is built into Sikhi principles. And I think we've been really thinking more about that recently. But certainly I know from a clinical standpoint, when we talk about self-care, so much of this resonates as well with everything I've been taught at home over the years, the importance of, sleep hygiene, waking up early, right? Having those routines, building in time for Simran or mindfulness, however you want to call it, right? That time to be reflective as well. The importance of eating well, but eating together as well, we know is good for us. And then also reaching out to those that we consider to be a part of our Sangat, whether it's friends, family, brothers, those people that are a part of our shared experience as well, and taking that time to be present when you are. I think with that bigger question around how do we balance this with all of the roles that we have, some of I think our responsibility is also to model that self-care, which can be tricky. And I know that for kids who often will idolize their fathers growing up, it's important also to show them how that balance can be, how they can be a part of that. I think that's one strategy around that balance as well. Is if it is Seva that they can be a part of, can they learn from you, alongside you, be a part of that experience, watch you struggle or fail and recover? Because I think when I think about what would I think of as terms of indicators of success in fatherhood, I think about resilience. And one of the best ways to learn that is by watching someone else model that for you as well. So I think those are important features that I try to think about, and particularly over the last year and a half where we've been close quarters.
That's true. But Deep Singh, any reflections for me on this?
I think that I think we've had a couple of different parts of COVID. the first 4 or 5 months when we were all sitting at home was different than what's happening right now. A little bit of getting old has kind of settled into what we do today. I think when it started, the whole idea of everybody being in the house, like like every other American family, we made sourdough bread, and because that was the most baked item in the country. Everybody was into that, and barbecue in the summertime, and I think we went through all of that. I think the discussion, I think the most interesting that's happened during this entire time, so we've, everybody's done the whole walking bit, and everybody, taking care. I think that's all fine. I think we've all done a bit of that. But I think we've had some really interesting dialogue and discussion in the house and conversations about what's happening, because it hasn't been just, right? I mean, COVID is just, if you think about the last 15 months, it's not just COVID. So much more has happened as a Sikh, right? As an American for us in this country. So if you think about the entire Black Lives Matter, this all happened at the same time. Lots and lots of discussion. The entire, the farmers event in India, right? Lots and lots of discussion. The whole idea of COVID coming back in India. And good Lord, look at what the Sikhs have done. Look at what the Panth has done, right? There isn't, oxygen lungers. What is that? Where does this come from? And so the magnanimousness and the hugeness of the situation and what's happening in the world. COVID is merely what triggered a lot, but quite honestly, the world is going through this massive, massive transformation in terms of how we think about life, how we think about priorities. There's all sorts of studies that will be done about the social things that changed in terms of, people watching, what they watched, how they spent their time, number of children being born, divorce. You name it, all sorts of things are happening. And within the Sikhi diaspora, the name that the Sikh Panth has made for itself, selflessly, has just been tremendous, and it's just been humbling. So that discussion, the dialogue, and my mother used to always say, "Putra, one of the biggest things," she said, "Dunya ch ek badi vaddi problem hai ki vichar kat hunda hai." Vichar, right? Discourse, discussion, and I think that's so. If I had to actually summarize it down to one thing, I would say the whole idea of vichar. And the whole idea of idea sharing and discussion, what are we learning out of it? How it's impacting my son is dramatically different than how it impacts my daughter, dramatically different than what impacts my daughter-in-law, and dramatically different than how it impacts me and my wife. So I think that whole idea of vichar and understanding, and by virtue of this, how is life going to be different as we go forward? That, I think, has been the biggest thing for me and our family.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more. This, for us growing up, in the 80s, 90s and stuff, there was such a dearth of contemporary role models for us. It was all very historic, and it was the figures around 1984, right? But we looked around, there wasn't anybody contemporary in the US, especially in Canada, US. UK had a little bit. Mostly it was this Sardar Peter Singh that was trying to be the Elvis impersonator, but there wasn't a lot more, we didn't see visibility. And it was finally when we started seeing those. But I look now at my children, I said just the plethora of amazing role models that are actually accessible. You mentioned Gurbir Virji, he came up to Toronto a few years ago. My son's got to spend time with him. Foja Singh has come through. Like, you look at people in all these different walks of life that are becoming so successful. And the Sikhs on the ground do. This has really been the upside, I think, of social media and these, is that there's so many great stories that my kids are telling. They're like, "Daddy, did you see this? Did you see them doing this?" I'm sure, like some of you, every night our viewing in our house was, let's sit down and watch the latest Kasan song that had come out, right? It was, all of a sudden my kids were more interested in stuff than I was. They were drawing into it. And I think there's been this real value that they can become seekers of their own. And our job is to kind of give them the tools, and they can kind of go on their own journey in that there. So I think there's a real sense I'm getting from you, Pradeep, is that, we create the space and let them flourish, and they kind of go their own journey there. So we have a few more.
Don't forget that guy Kulveer Singh, huh? He's apparently pretty cool.
I'm one of those good from far but far from good kind of guys.
Merely speculation from my perspective. I understand he's pretty cool too.
Thank you for that. So we have a few more minutes left, so I'll see some of the other questions come in. But a couple more things I want to talk about is one, if you're comfortable sharing it, is I think all of us have very strong partnerships with our spouses in this journey, and that we're just speaking today I think we've done Mother's Day sessions as well at SikhRI and Father's Day, and we're really just one side of the coin right now, right? And most of us would humbly say the lesser side of the coin. But how's the maybe just speak to you? I'll start with Manpreet again. Talk a little bit about how your relationship with your partner has changed, and how are you seeing your partner in a different light? I think we can all see the moment where our wives became moms, right? And the transition in their lives, in their eyes, and all of a sudden we're not the apple of their eyes. We're not the most important thing in their life anymore. It's something else. But how does that transition gone for you? And what's the respect or the relationship that you've had with your partner?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, look, I think it's been fantastic. I think it's been a privilege to be able to, because the lockdown has meant that I've been able to spend a lot of time with my daughter, but it's also meant that I've been able to spend a lot of time with my wife.
Yeah.
The two kind of go hand in hand. And I think it's been great. I think it's been fantastic for our relationship, being able to spend that time with her, being able to see, what she went through, through the birth. Because I think sometimes we forget, childbirth is not a simple, uncomplicated manner. It's incredibly traumatic for the mother. From a health perspective, if you go back in history, it was fatal for many, many women. It's a huge biological process that they have to go through, and seeing her manage that, recover that, the bond that she's built with the child, and then us working together collectively to bring the kid up. And look, as you say, it's a proper partnership. And I think I'm going to touch on one of the points you sort of mentioned earlier, which is, you sort of talked about, how do you think about raising a daughter? Because we have a baby girl. And I think one of the things that's probably most pertinent to that is she's going to see, how do I interact with her mum? What's the nature of our own relationship? Because I'm modeling to her, how women ought to be treated. So I think, that is also very much at the forefront of my mind. And, I think I have got an immense respect for my wife and, what she's been through and the way in which she's connected with the child, and, the stresses and the difficulties that a mother go through, which are, fundamentally they're very different to a man. It's not our body, which is having to accommodate the child, grow it, and then deliver it, and then deal with the aftermath. And I think, being there day in, day out after that process, I think it's enabled me to get a degree of color into that perhaps I wouldn't have seen if I'd done the customary 2 weeks of paternity leave and then back in the office, 5 days a week. So I think it's been great, not only in terms of the relationship with the child, but also my relationship with her.
Very well said. Good. Ripidam, any thoughts?
It's really interesting. You talked about this earlier at home as well, around how it's almost like motherhood starts a bit earlier than fatherhood does, right? With those physiological changes, it doesn't become quite as real often for dads until, I think for me, it was when we felt the baby kick and I could actually feel it. And even then it was more so when our son was born. So watching that transition, and how also that experience for our partners or wives I feel like that redefining of personality or persona is greater for women, just in the way of how society works right now. That transition into motherhood seems like it's a bigger deal, and I think so much of that is based on how society kind of looks at those gender norms and what happens afterwards as well. So I feel like that experience is quite imbalanced, right, compared to what it's like for fathers. But for my wife and I, one of the conversations that's really been evolving over time from a Sikhi standpoint is really, how do we define ourselves? Because now we have a little person asking us questions, questions that we may not have answers to, questions we didn't have access to answers to when we were growing up, again, 80s and 90s, where there wasn't access to those resources. And getting to think a little bit of, what are things that we would do differently from what our parents did or were able to do or had the access and resources to be able to do as well. So I think in that way, it's been really nice to reflect together, to disagree, to kind of explore, right, those various pieces. And the other thing that's been interesting recently, and I would wonder if Bhadeep Singh Baji has something to say about this, is as we reflect on, we have a 9-year-old right now, but as we think about what empty nest sort of stages will look like, because even now during the pandemic, our son's been spending long periods of time with grandparents, or away from us, or even just, doing video games or very virtual school away from us, and we have more time together, and thinking about, so is this what this is going to be like down the road, right? And kind of thinking about the evolution of our relationship together as well. So I think there's some really interesting things to reflect on there.
Yeah. Excellent. But Deep Singh, going from husband and wife to mother and father, and that journey there, you were an empty nester, I think, for a little bit there, and then now you're a full house again, and then soonly. So reflect on the journey with the marriage side of things, the partnership.
Yeah, many years ago, when my son must have been about a year old, we were going to a kirtan, and Bhai Jeevan Singh was there, and. So my mother said to me, "Bache kirtan ja rahe ho, to zarur Bhai Jeevan Singh mil ke aana, Satwan Singh mila dena." We went to the kirtan, and Bhai Jeevan Singh did the kirtan, and after the kirtan, I, took my son in my arms, and I very excitedly went up to Bhai Jeevan Singh, and I said, and we knew, our family had known Bhai Jeevan Singh. I said, "Bhai Sahab, sada beta hai." He just he looked, and then he looked around, and he said, "बच्चे दी माँ कित्थे है?" I said, "भाई साहब मैं and he said, "बच्चे दी माँ कित्थे है?" I'm thinking, what does that have to do with anything? And so I went and got Manbeen, and I said, "Hey," and he said, "Bibi, tu pakad." And I'm thinking, okay, this was supposed to be me, but all right, fine. So my wife Manbeen held Satwan Singh, and then he looked, and then he rubbed his hand over my son's forehead, and he said, "Puta, mata ki asis." And as I'm getting goosebumps now. As I'm telling you the story, I'm getting goosebumps. That the lesson of how Sikhi intertwines in so much of everything that we do, and that every time. I mean, I've sung that Shabad 100 times since, and every time I think of that, I remember Bhai Jeevan Singh saying, "Puta, mata ki asis," because it's not just Puta mata ki, it's Puta mata ki asis. And I think that Kulveer sums it up quite well. Just recognizing and appreciating and understanding. And I think Ripudamanji, I think the empty nest piece, check back with me in a year. Right now we got a full house, and but I imagine that like anything else in life, there's lots of self-discovery, there are lots of phases in life. The older I get, the more I realize that life is a series of phases, and we go through journeys, and we go through multiple journeys. Some of them together, some of them alone. And part of that is trying to figure out which is which and what takes priority when.
Excellent. Thank you, Virji. We'll move to close in a couple seconds, but a couple of questions have come through the chat that I want to make sure that we touch on. There's been, and I think Ripudaman, given the work you've done, and you can feel free to do a shameless plug for Panjabi Kids Health through this answer, but a couple of questions have come through around helping our children deal with tough emotions, with moods, with mental illness, when that's certainly a situation in our community, and not just diagnosed, but just everything with COVID and stuff like that. And so maybe you can speak to that, and then I'll give you a second question on that, because I know that there was actually a TikTok on this you did about father figures who are going through their own challenges, things like alcohol abuse, substance abuse in our community are rife as well, and the impact that's having on the children in the way. So take a little bit and just weave those two things together for us.
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of Panjabi Kids Health, like you mentioned, so it's an online family support resource we've tried to create. So it's on Instagram at Panjabi Kids Health. We're also on TikTok and Facebook. So I think between the various channels, we're at about 30,000 followers. It's English and Punjabi information that is brought to the online community from people who talk like you, look like you, have some lived experience, and we're trying to bring evidence-based information from regulated health professionals. And it's everything from picky eaters in the early years up to adolescence, mental health. This week we're going through paternal mental health, as well as part of Father's Day. So it's tricky, those conversations within our religious community, within our ethnic community, to talk about mental health. And so generally, I think for mental health, developed mental health, I would say it's not something you want to wait and see about. It's really important to reach out for help, whether it's within your Sangha, within your networks that you have, or with a healthcare provider. but really important, including for our little ones as well. So if you have concerns there, and in particular, I'd be thinking about things like changes in their eating habits, their sleeping habits, their mood, the way in which they interact with others. It's important to look at some of the resources that are out there. So much more that's out there now that is accessible online, virtual, pandemic-proof and safe, and also culturally tailored as well, thinking about what our households may be like and what some of those experiences might be like as well. So really important to reach out there. And likewise, we know that we have parents or other folks at home where we're having mental health challenges, whether it's with mood, anxiety, addictions or substance use. There are multi-generational impacts of that. And some of that has been exacerbated within our community because of our own experiences with intergenerational trauma and the various experiences that do echo through generations. But it's really important, again, to take a look at some of the resources that are out there. Try to do it, to have some of these conversations where you can in safe spaces. Understand that there are a lot of resources out there, and once you have those initial conversations and break through that stigma, I think you'll find that there are other folks with shared experiences, and there are lots of interventions that work to help you overcome those challenges.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's been my experience time and time again. Every time I think I'm the only one going through something, you share, and the universe opens up, and there are so many resources out there. And I think it has to be the first step is acknowledging it and starting the conversation with somebody. Right. So absolutely good. We only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of you to kind of answer the question. I'll go in reverse order from our friends, the UK to the US, and then back to Canada. Here is that. Looking back, it's you've done some things right, and probably like me, you've learned you've done a lot of things wrong that have taught you some things. So speaking back to your day one as a father, the day that you come into fatherhood, what would be the piece of advice that you would kind of give yourself, the thing to avoid, the thing to do, the thing to make sure you focus on? What would that one kind of reflection be to somebody, to that new father coming into the world that's scared, shocked, and clueless as I was on that first day there? So Manpreet Singh, what would your last words be?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because babies don't come with instruction manuals. So there aren't anything to read when you take them out. Look, I would say, look, stay in Jaldi Kala. Like, every child is different. Your experience is going to be different. Work together with your partner. Together, the pair of you will get through it. Like, for us, it was particularly difficult because of the fact that it was through the lockdown and we couldn't even have family or friends over. And so we were really... we didn't know what we were doing, but it was fine. It ended up okay. I might need to have this conversation with you again in 20 years' time to confirm that point. But it will be for the best. I think at times you can over worry and you can overthink things. And I think in this world, with the amount of resources that are out there, they're a huge blessing, but don't let them become a curse because you're always double guessing yourself or thinking about what it is you need to do. So, do what you need to do the research, and, just trust in Hukam, and good is good for the rest.
Wonderful. Thank you. Pavdeep Singh, what would your words of wisdom be?
I would say that, I mentioned earlier about parenting, fatherhood being a marathon, not a sprint. Do your best. Invest as much as you can. Then have some faith. I consider it my privilege and honor to be the son of Ujagar Singh and Gobind Kaur. But I also consider it my privilege and honor to be the father of Satwan Singh, Kiranjot Kaur, and now Hanisha Kaur. And just as over so many years, my parents honored that relationship. My children honor me, and they make me proud with small things and big things. And I think you have to just be able to see that. Mm-hmm. And that's what, to whatever extent I can, that's what I try to do. So I would say, I think Manpreet's right. Don't stress it. Do the best you can. Have some faith. Have some faith. My mother, every once in a while, when I'd say this isn't right, my mother would smack me on the head. She said, "Tu apne aap ko samajhda ki hai? Rab hai na." Exact word. "Tu apne aap ko samajhda ki hai? Rab hai na."
Wonderful. Thank you. No, my my mom often says, she goes, ardas vich badi barkat hai. Jithe theda dimag ਖੜ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਥੋੜੀ ਅਕਲ ਮੁੱਕ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਆ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਗੂਗਲ ਬਾਬਾ ਵੀ ਜਵਾਬ ਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦਾ ਉੱਥੇ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਆ ਉੱਥੇ ਰੱਬ ਦੇ ਵਿਸ਼ਵਾਸ ਰੱਖਣਾ the ਅਰਦਾਸ as a Sikh is a very special place, and I think that sense of faith absolutely is a huge part of that. It is a leap of faith. So Rupa Daman, what are your thoughts in closing?
Yeah, I think both of what was just said really resonates with me. I would say it's important to concentrate on the journey, not the destination. I know we say that a lot, but parenting is very much a journey, and we can't always be thinking about that end product, right? So much of that is what happens along that journey. The bumps in the road are tricky. They may be embarrassing. They may be hard for us, but those are learning opportunities for us and also teaching opportunities for our children as well. So I think it's important to, Jardikala as a part of that journey, right, is what's going to carry you through. And thinking about it doesn't have to be perfect. That's part of where the learning comes from, right, is really taking that time to pause, to reflect on those experiences and be present during that time is the most important thing. And I don't know if I understood that a few years ago in the same sort of way, especially like when we were in our early stages of parenting, where it was all about, how many dirty diapers do we have today? How many grams of whatever of weight have we gained? All of that stuff. But then even that is a part of the journey. We look back fondly on it. But I think, just honoring each step of that is so important.
Yeah, sounds like you've gone from the science of parenting to acquiring the art of parenting as you go through. So thank you all three of you, Virgis. It's been, the time has flown by. I did take a bunch of notes and lots of reflections from each of you around how to approach the role of fatherhood, of being a parent, of still being a son, taking the inspiration from our parents, creating that environment, doing everything we can. Not taking ourselves too seriously. We very, very judiciously avoided all dad jokes in this conversation, so I'm surprised because usually none of us can do that. But with that sense of kind of levity and humor, I think we kind of reflected on that's many our roles. Not take ourselves too seriously, not take the kids too seriously, not take the role too seriously. And it's a game of averages, doing the best you can with the time that we have. And it very much is like udum and hukum. We put in our hardest effort day in, day out, and at the end the hukum is sweet, regardless of what the outcome is, exactly what we wanted in what way. And often in life the exact thing we wanted is not how it turns out, but what we get is something that we can accept and find meaning in. So thank you all for great insights, your time, your openness, and sharing about your family there. Thank you to our listeners who chimed in with some great questions and insights there. At the Sikh Research Institute, which I've been a pleasure of being a part of in various ways for almost 15 years. Those words that Pavdeep Singh said about being relevant, mattering, is exactly what SikhRI's mandate is how do we make sure that Sikhi can matter in your life, that Sikhi can provide you with the tools, the resources to be relevant in your life, and SikhRI is just a vehicle for that. And what we provide in programming like this and everything else we do for young people, for parents, for children, we want to be there alongside as you walk closer to the Guru and make yourself a Guru-inspired person. So thank you, everyone, for your time today. With that, I will pass it back over to Manvinder Kaur to close the webinar.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll close this out today. On behalf of SikhRI, I'll echo what Govirji has already shared, but I thank today's wonderful panelists for their insightful conversation, for everyone who joined us, who stayed with us for this hour and a half on a beautiful Saturday morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. I know I appreciated being a fly on the wall in this conversation, and I'm sure we'll all be thinking about this conversation and the relationships and the conversations that we have or have had with the father figures throughout our lives. As always, a recording of this webinar will be available within 24 hours. And lastly, don't forget to tune into the SikhCast, a podcast produced by SikhRI, where we explore the various issues and events affecting Sikhs worldwide. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Today's webinar will be ending now. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
You were listening to SikhCast by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.